Hello and thank you for joining in on today's training. Heart & Solutions is a proud provider of CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below to find and take your quiz.
All right, well, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of You Need a Training. Today we have Jaden Aubrin, who will be introducing and training on clinically addressing trauma and systemic oppression. It is designed to discuss the interconnectedness of trauma, empathy, and oppression. I am Natalie. I am a therapist at Heart & Solutions, and I am super excited and happy to be hosting this training today. I'd like to take a minute to review a few housekeeping items. This is not an APT training, so while it is being recorded, you don't need to have your cameras on. We would still love to see your face, but it is not a requirement for CEs. This training is scheduled for 3 hours. We do not have any scheduled breaks. Please make sure that you have what you need, but also know to take care of yourself and take any breaks as needed. So, as I said, today's training is presented by Jaden Aubrin. Jaden Aubrin is a Black, Indigenous, queer, non-binary psychotherapist and personal trainer. They specialize in holistically healing complex trauma by integrating mental, physical, sexual, and spiritual health. They aim to make healing fun and accessible by using food, movement, music, and art. Jaden, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us. I am really excited to get into this training, and I don't want to take up any more of this valuable time, so I'm going to hand it over to you and we can get started.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Natalie, so much for the introduction. Super happy to be here. I love nerding out about this. So we're gonna nerd out, learn some things. So yes, I'm Jaden. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm licensed in Washington and in New Jersey, and I also do therapy in the United Kingdom and Spain. Spain is where I live. I am also a certified personal trainer and have certifications in school social work, integrative mental health, sex therapy and provision, clinical trauma professional, and trauma-informed weightlifting. And I have one in the works right now for food as medicine, and I'm very excited about that. And yes, I'm the founder of Tice Consulting and Therapy, where I do consulting and therapy and also trainings, retreats, workshops, and then Chaotic Healing, where I do holistic health coaching, personal training, and have courses and stuff. So I have a 30-day twerking for trauma course is the new thing right now. Um, but yeah, so today we're going to talk a bit about what is trauma, what's going on in the body, and in the brain when we are experiencing trauma, and then how that relates to bias and systemic oppression, and starting to learn how to identify oppression and bias as a trauma response once we really look at what's happening in the nervous system and in the brain. And then once we are able to recognize it, we will start talking about skills and tools to address things for both your clients and for yourself as a clinician. I'm definitely a somatic therapist, but I'm also a relational therapist. And to be in relationship means you have to show up as yourself. And we'll talk a bit more about why that's important in this work. So that means self-care for the clinician is super important. Um, and yeah, and then if we have time at the end, I have some practice scenarios for us, but that really just depends on how much discussion is had, how many questions are had, I love answering questions. I love for there to be some discussion portion. So please do not feel too shy, inhibitively shy, to ask those questions and or spark a discussion. I also get very excited, just like a little border collie. And since I'm sitting down for most of this training, the excitement is going to be like mental. And so sometimes that does mean I might like talk really quickly, or maybe I don't finish my thought all the way. So if that happens, feel free to just be like, Jaden, please slow down. What are you talking about? And I am more than happy to receive that feedback. Um, but with all of that said, let's go ahead and get on the same page about what is trauma because there is so much information out there and there are so many different ways to look at it. And so I want to focus on how I look at it and therefore how it's going to be helpful when we're conceptualizing oppression as trauma. Also, I am not going to read the words on the screen. I have full faith in your capabilities as adults to read. So my slides here are very bare bones. If you want to take pictures of them, like feel free, go for it. And then I will talk about what I feel is important. And then again, if there's anything on a slide that you feel I didn't cover, well, let me know. Okay, but what is trauma? So first we need to talk about the difference between single event trauma and complex trauma. And so the easiest way to break this down is if you take a hammer and you hit somebody, that is going to cause some damage, right? A single event happened. Now, how much damage is caused? It depends on a lot of different things, right? If you're an MMA fighter and you're used to getting hit by objects, you're probably not gonna have as much damage as if you're like a 7-year-old child, right? We have like resilience and experience and all these things that become protective factors from that single event. But whether it's a bruise, broken skin, a broken bone, getting hit with a hammer is most likely going to cause some damage. That's a reasonable expectation. That is single event trauma and what often leads to PTSD. What I'm going to talk mostly about today is complex trauma. And so complex trauma is if you were just to like get poked in the same spot over and over and over again for days, months, years. At first, you're just like, it's just a poke, no big deal, right? You can just ignore it. But then after a while, that spot will start to get a bit sore and then it'll probably start to bruise. And then your body will likely start to form a callus and harden to protect that spot. So each poke doesn't hurt as much. And that callousing piece, that is what that is the complex trauma piece of all of this. And I think it's really important to distinguish those things because having a bruise or a broken bone from a hammer and then having a callus from like ongoing pokes, those are different physiological responses. And so while there may be overlaps between the physiological response of PTSD, single event trauma, and complex trauma, there are some differences. And so I just want to be clear what I'm talking about today is complex trauma. So when we look at a callus, it's not very simple. If you get hit by a hammer, it's just like, ooh, hammers are bad. Boom, right? But when you are callousing after all these pokes, you don't really have one specific poke that is bad, right? Instead, this callus starts to turn into narratives of I'm too soft. I need to harden. I need to protect myself. And it's those narratives that is the core of dealing with complex trauma. And I don't know if y'all ever had a callus, but it's not simple to heal those things, right? Because you gotta like shave it off with like one thing, and then you gotta shave it off with a different thing, and then you gotta let it soak, and then you gotta use the thick cream, and then the rehabilitating cream, and then the regular cream, and then you gotta check in, see how it's doing, and then you gotta repeat the process again, you know? Um, so it is an ongoing thing. And I think this is really, really important as clinicians, as again, I love somatic work. I do a lot of somatic things, but they're starting to become this narrative of, well, I just need to release the traumatic energy and then I'll be fine. No, right? Because when there's a callus, we really need some ongoing work and support. So we're going to talk a bit about, how to do that. But last thing here, I want to emphasize everyone has trauma, right? Because everyone has been poked. These are little invalidations, little moments of incongruence or unsafety. So, for example, if a child was teased at school and I don't know, some kid didn't like his shoes, and little Johnny comes home to mom and it's like, oh no, I had a bad day at school. Someone didn't like my shoes. They were mean to me. And mom is like, ah, don't worry about them. That's not important. It's fine. We can all see how that's probably good intentions on the mom's side, right? Like you don't need to, let everything someone says about you, hurt you. You can disregard certain things, et cetera, et cetera. But really, that was invalidation. Um, the kid was saying, I feel hurt or sad or whatever. And the mom said, you're fine. There's no reason to feel upset. But the kid does feel upset, right? And so what does the kid learn? Oh, maybe I can't trust my body. Maybe I can't trust myself when I feel this particular thing. And again, it's just a poke. But when that kind of stuff happens, after days and days and years and years and years, we start to form narratives. And it's not because anyone was being particularly mean, right? It's just a thing we all experience. Um, so what happens in our bodies when we are experiencing these things? So I like to keep this as simple as possible. Because again, there is a lot of different ways to look at and conceptualize trauma. But, after studying it for so long, you kind of can like just zoom out and see some of the overarching big picture stuff. And this is how I often explain it to clients to make it help them understand as well. So first, let's talk about the energy of it all. And to do that, we're going to need to talk about the nervous system. Specifically, we're talking about the central nervous system, which runs down the center of your body, is very connected to the vagus nerve, which is a very popular word right now. It's different than the peripheral nervous system, which is your limbs, peripheral of your body. Doesn't mean trauma doesn't affect your peripheral nervous system, but a lot of the research is focused on the central nervous system. And so I like to break this down as your nervous system is either making a lot of energy, possibly too much energy, or not enough energy, or just not making energy and it's possibly not enough. Um, and so when it's making energy, right, the nervous system is gearing up to go. A lot of different things um, will tell the nervous system to make energy or not. But emotions are one of those things, right? So things like anxiety, fear, stress, anger, irritability, but also things like joy, excitement, anticipation, right? You're so giddy, right? You can't even sit still because you're just, you know? Um, so having energy in your body, your nervous system being activated is not a bad thing, right? There are pros and cons. And it is really dependent on the situation. If someone is like, if you're at a funeral and you're like, I feel so giddy, right? That's inappropriate to the situation. We might want to just have a look at that. And then on the other end, oh, I don't know if I said that, but that is hyperarousal or sympathetic activation for people who do like the scientific words for all of these things. At the other end, we have hypoarousal or parasympathetic activation, and that is the nervous system is calming down. It's not really making too much energy. So that can be sadness, depression, low motivation, catatonia, but it can also be relaxation, just being chill, calm, content. Um, so again, it's not good or bad. We just want to look at how it's showing up for the situation, make sure it's appropriate to the situation, and that we're staying within our window of tolerance. So a lot of times we start to see clinical symptoms when whatever our like we are energetically is outside of our window of tolerance, right? So if this is hyperarousal over here and then hypoarousal over here, and your window of tolerance is this, if you have something that goes all the way over here, it's not that it's a bad emotion or a harm or like a bad intensity. It's just outside of your window of tolerance, right? So a lot of this work is to expand our window of tolerance. Very, very important when we're doing work with like bias and oppression, because oftentimes someone will be like, oh, how dare you say that? You're a racist. And then you're like, oh, me? Racist? And you got shame, you got fear of, oh my gosh, am I actually racist? And you're angry and like, how dare they say that? And boop, all the way outside of your window of tolerance. And now where like emotion brain is activated, you're not thinking logically, you're value aligned, and it's not helpful. And we'll talk more about what happens with the brain in a second, but expanding that window of tolerance to experience discomfort on both ends of the spectrum is super important. You might also see some cyclical burnout with this, where people go, 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 and then crash, right? See this ADHD, bipolar, like a lot of different diagnoses. But starting to notice those cycles in people can be super helpful, especially if people have trouble slowing down until they crash. That is a possible indicator that there's like some trauma piling up in the body. So, yes, so the nervous system is making energy. And then what we do with that energy is also super important, because just making energy or not making energy, not the end of the world. But with trauma specifically, a lot of times that energy gets stuck in the body. So if y'all ever had a cat or a dog, right? You ever seen it get stressed out and then it gets zoomies, right? Afterwards, it releases that energy. Same thing here, right? We evolve to get activated, get stressed out. And this is often when the body is making energy. We get activated, we get stressed out. We need to run from a tiger. And then once we're safe, we can calm down and we can relax. But we are often not running. We are often, as a society, sitting. And furthermore, we're often taught to ignore our bodies and our bodily cues from like very young ages. Like, don't fidget, don't like wait to use the bathroom, wait to eat. Like, just focus on doing like writing your letters in front of you. Like, we're taught this at a very young age to disconnect from our body and intellectualize everything, right? And so we often are not connected to when this energy is coming up in our body. But just because we're not connected to it doesn't mean it's not happening, right? And so when we don't know that energy is, moving around in our body and then we don't do anything with it, it just gets stuck. And that is, um, we start to see a lot of symptoms, physical symptoms, definitely, which I have just some common ones, definitely not an exclusive list down at the bottom. But we start to see a lot of physical health conditions. Um, there's a lot of dissociation because being in the body is actually really uncomfortable when all that stuck energy is there. And yeah, I feel like there was one more point I was going to make, and I'm forgetting it right now. So we're just going to move on. But yeah, so a lot of trauma. Oh, flashbacks. That's the other really big thing. Flashbacks, nightmares. Right, is that original energy of whatever happened being stuck in the body. Um, yeah, so the last thing I want to say is that trauma does change how our genes are expressed. And I really think this is super important because it's really, really easy, especially as we start talking about bias and oppression, to make excuses and say, well, it's because of this trauma in me that I'm like this. No, 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 no. Right? So we can heal. Trauma can change like the expression of our genes, and then the healing of trauma can also change the expression of our genes. There's also neuroplasticity, which is like super freaking cool, and that we can just like always keep like rebuilding neural pathways. Like my favorite example is Gabrielle Gifford, who got shot in the head and then couldn't speak anymore, and then used music therapy to like start singing and then go from singing to speech and it's like creating new neural pathways. Like, yo, if you can get shot in the head and relearn how to speak, like you can do whatever mental health goals you're working on, right? You're ADHD, you can make that routine, right? You're traumatized, you can emotionally regulate. Like we can figure it out. It's just a path, it's a journey, right? I like to set the bar high because when we do ourselves a disservice when we don't. Like I really truly believe that we can do anything that we want to do. The only thing we have to do is die, right? Anything else is just pros and cons, right? The more helpful and more harmful. Um, okay. Before I go into the neurological effects of that, any questions about this? Cool. Okay, so there's so much to say about trauma in the brain. There's so many different models of how to conceptualize the brain and so many different parts. So, like, I mean, we could just go through and look at each part of the brain and how trauma affects it. So, we're not going to do that. But I will talk about the uh, highest clinical applications that I often see um, and how trauma affects the brain in that way. So, if you have any further questions about the neuroscience of it, again, feel free to let me know. But one of the main things that happens is that there is a deterioration between emotion brain and logic brain. I used to be certified in DBT, so that's a huge background of mine. You can think of this as, um, the emotion brain being like amygdala and associated areas back here, logic brain being frontal cortex back up here. You can also think of it as right brain versus left brain. There is actually a bridge that connects those two parts of the brain called the corpus callosum, and that does deteriorate with a lot of trauma exposure. Um, but regardless of how you want to think of it, we got our emotion brain, and we got our logic brain. And our emotion brain, when it gets really activated, specifically outside of our window of tolerance, logic brain shuts down. The reason for this is evolutionarily beneficial, as most things in the body are. Um, so if you saw a tiger, you likely would not be like, that breed of tiger is the one that is really good at swimming, but not as good at climbing trees. And I'm pretty sure that there is a river northeast. So I'm going to run southwest because there's a forest that way. And if I can just climb into the tree no, you're not going to do all of that. You're just going to run because there's a tiger and it's chasing you and you don't have time to think through all your options, right? So quick example of why logic brain shuts down when emotion brain is active. Again, it's not a good or bad thing. It just is what it is, and there is a reason for it. But if we're emotionally activated a lot and we're spending a lot of time in emotion brain and logic brain just keeps shutting down, then logic brain starts to deteriorate, right? And the ability to go back and forth starts to deteriorate. So you can think of it as like taxes, right? Like, why would a government pay like a road that no one drives on? If it's not being used, they're not going to maintenance the roads, but then more potholes come and then no one drives on it. And then it's like a downward spiral, right? It's the same thing with your brain. So just like little foreshadowing. Part of this is going back and forth in between emotion brain and logic brain and building up the ability to do that. Um, but yes, this is really important because we see this often as clinicians in session where things are going great and then they're not, right? And we can really start to identify that as logic brain is starting to shut down. Our ability to make words also starts to shut down. Important though, our ability to communicate doesn't start to shut down, just our ability to make words, right? Which is the Broca's area. So finding other ways to communicate can be really helpful. Writing, music, humming, drawing, charades, like whatever, right? Things that are not verbal speaking. Um, Inability to record narrative memory. Uh, if someone is having trouble going from um, it was this and then that and then that and then that, and they're typically able to do that, right? That's another indicator that some traumatic energy is being stirred up and they're starting to get emotionally activated. Executive functioning is pretty much, it's all frontal lobe stuff. It's logic brain. So if we have logic brain deteriorating, executive functioning is going to be deteriorating. And I don't know if you are already seeing these similarities, but there is a lot of correlation between neurodivergence and trauma, right? If you take a child who has experienced complex trauma under the age of 12, it is so hard to really tease out, like, are they ADHD? Like, were they born with their brain that way? Or was it trauma? Like, it's so similar. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. Um, Black and white thinking, right? Because again, our bodies, when we're in an emotion brain, like to simplify things. They're not going to think through a lot of different options and nuance, right? It's basically going to be like, am I going to die or not? Life or death? So whenever we get into life, death, good, bad, right, wrong, any of those things, that tells us that, ooh, we're not really speaking from a logic brain place. We're speaking from an emotion brain place. I like to supplement that with helpful versus harmful. It's still a duality, but it offers more nuance, right? It's not that things are good or bad, just is it more helpful or more harmful? And for what goal, right? And we'll talk a bit more about that later. And then last big thing is that we're going to talk about empathy and trauma, and that trauma impairs our ability to empathize. And this is really the crux of this whole training and bringing this intersection of oppression and trauma together. So, the bold statement here is trauma is the opposite of empathy. Empathy is the opposite of trauma. You cannot really be experiencing both at the same time because one is about survival and one is about thriving and connection. And connection is inherently dangerous, and survival is all about keeping you safe. Okay, sorry. Connection is not just there's a risk with connection, right? So empathy and trauma is one or the other. And when we experience trauma and we store that trauma in our body, it impairs our ability to empathize in an ongoing manner. And so to understand that, we need to look at the neurological underpinnings of trauma. There are two main um, ways that we neurologically experience, oh, sorry, the neurological underpinnings of empathy. There's two main ways that we experience empathy neurologically. So there's bottoms up, which is our mirror neurons response. So a few quick examples here. If a baby in a room cries, if there's another baby in the room, that other baby will cry, right? This is an innate ability we have from a very early age. If you walk into a sporting event, and even if you do not care about sports, all of a sudden you are excited. If you walk into a funeral, even if you don't know who died, all of a sudden you feel sad, right? And it's not that you're just noticing that other people are feeling a thing. Like you feel it yourself. Your body is saying, like, you feel this thing now. It is now your emotion, right? And then the other form of empathy, it starts to develop around 7 years old, is the top-down processing. And that is the ability to say, okay, I see you, and you're looking down, your eyes are down, your shoulders are slumped over, you're not picking up your feet very much, and you're moving kind of slowly. You must be sad. And I felt sad in the past, so I understand what you're feeling. So the key here is this ability to say, I am me and you are you. And I can see that you are feeling a certain way, right? Or you're likely feeling a certain way because of these um, characteristics about you, right? But there is an I and then there is a you. And if you're teaching empathy to people, autism spectrum, schizophrenia, any of things, this is a lot of what you do, right? Like you have the expressive face charts of angry, right? So that is learned. Now that top-down processing, again, frontal lobe. And like we said, trauma breaks down that bridge from emotion brain to logic brain, or amygdala to frontal lobe area. So essentially what can end up happening when you start experiencing a lot of trauma is that your mirror neurons, they're doing what they're doing. They're feeling other people's anger and sadness and joy, but your frontal lobe is not kicking in to say, I am me and they are them. And I am picking up on their emotions. They're not my emotions, they're their emotions. Your frontal lobes aren't doing that job. Right. And this, you'll see a lot of people who identify as empaths and highly sensitive people in the neurodivergent and like trauma community because of this, right? They feel so much, right? And when we feel that much, when we can kind of lean into that, just like, oh my gosh, I feel so much all the time, or we dissociate, right? We dissociate away from the other person and our bodies. And there becomes a really big separation, right? Because we can't handle the connection. It's outside of our window of tolerance. And so you might actually see an over reliance on logical thinking. Um, and you can see this sometimes if someone gets really upset. You ever like been texting a friend and you're like kind of like having an intense conversation, and then all of a sudden they start texting like they're writing a business email. It's like super, super formal, right? Like they are shutting down the emotional connection piece and overcompensating with the logic piece. But all of this is a disruptance in our ability to empathize and connect. And the more trauma we experience, the harder it is to connect with others on a very neurological and physiological level. Now, okay, I'm about to tie this into implicit bias, but before I do, like any questions or thoughts about this piece?
No, I just want to say, Jane, like, I think we hear bottom up a lot, and that part makes sense. And so taking the time to really think through that top down processing and the distinction and differences there has been super helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I first read this research, I found it really interesting because before people would like, I have always wanted this more sympathy, right? It hasn't been framed as empathy. But then there's this research saying, like, no, this is actually what's happening neurologically with empathy. So it's made me really start to differentiate sympathy and empathy a bit more intentionally as well. But yeah, I think this is a really important piece because a lot of times we think of empathy as uh, feeling everything that another person feels. I like to use this analogy of an emotional river. We like to jump into the river with the person. But the top-down processing is instead of jumping into the river and possibly both of y'all drowning, is throwing a lifeline, right? Being standing on the banks and throwing a lifeline. And I think both tools are important. Um, okay. So I will give y'all a moment to read this very, very long, well, it's not that long, but a quote from the New York Times article. Okay. So what I want y'all to take from this is that like literally everything else I'm going to say in this training, implicit bias is not good or bad. I truly don't believe there's anything that is good or bad. I don't even think a trauma response is always good or bad, right? Because the other way to frame a trauma response is a survival response. Um, implicit bias is not good or bad. It can be helpful or it can be harmful. I am non-binary. I have an X on my passport. I live out of the country now. There are reasons for that. If I am in a rural area in the United States and I see certain types of flags and certain types of just symbols and things, right? I'm going to have some assumptions and I'm going to feel unsafe. And the empathetic connective response would be, well, I don't know these people. They could be really, really great people. There's so many reasons people have a variety of beliefs. I really don't think like everyone who supports Trump or something is a terrible person or like no, I lived in Kentucky for a few years. I know it's way more nuanced than that. Um, but in that moment, if I'm all alone and I'm seeing certain things, that's not the time for me to be having an empathetic response, right? Because the risk of me being wrong is too high. I'm gonna be on guard. I'm gonna be tense. I'm gonna be hyper vigilant. And that's okay. That is beneficial to me in that moment. Now, where things often go wrong is that when people get updated information, they don't update their biases. So, okay, let's say my car breaks down in whatever rural town I'm in, and I have to stay there, much to my upset. I'm a city person too, ugh. And everyone's super kind to me, wearing their flags and their hats, just so kind, helping me out, getting like giving me my parts, my car parts, and finding me a nice hotel to stay in and whatever, right? At that point, I need to update my bias about those particular people, right? And also about the group at large, right? Because we don't want to just like tokenize people. It's like, these people over here, like they're different, right? Um, I want to update my bias. This is actually a lot of my experience living in Kentucky. I had someone tell me we worked together at an animal shelter, and then she was like, you know, I don't know if I'm racist. There was like three black people in my high school of 1800. I never saw them. I've not had an opportunity to find out. And I was like, honestly, like fair. I realize that most people are not trying to be harmful, oppressive assholes most of the time, right? Sometimes people are. But I do think a lot of times people are trying the best that they can and trying to be safe the best that they can. It really, living in Kentucky, updated my beliefs about a lot of different types of people. Now, that doesn't mean I don't hold them accountable to poor behavior, right? That's a very different thing. But it's important to update beliefs because when we don't update beliefs, our biases become outdated and they no longer become useful. But bias, it can be good or bad. Or sorry, helpful or harmful. It's not good or bad. Now, when we tie bias in with unprocessed trauma. Have a little fun thing that happens. And I like to illustrate this by thinking of Game of Thrones. And if you are someone who, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunately, have not watched Game of Thrones, I want you to think of any medieval set show or movie or book. But in these types of medieval set media, there's usually this moment where usually a young boy, is at a scene of some public like beheading, torture, execution thing, right? And it's either they've snuck in because they're not supposed to be there because they're young, or like in the case of Game of Thrones, it's time for them to be a man, and you can't cry, like you cannot do it. You gotta just toughen up, right? And why is that? Because we know if a child too young sees something that awful, they are scarred, right? The nightmares, the changes in personality. And why? Especially if they're below the age of 7, because their frontal lobes have not yet started to really develop. And the frontal lobes are the place where we start to say, I am me and you are you. So a younger child does not have the ability to make a distinction of this happens to this person, but it's not happening to me. They just feel it as it's happening to themselves, right? As we get older, we gain the ability to say, I am me, you are you. And that is going to put us in survival mode. Or sorry, let me back up. So when we're saying I am me and you are you, we're using our frontal lobes. But often in those moments, we don't like what we're feeling from our mirror neurons, right? That's going to be overwhelming. So we disconnect, we dissociate. And when we disconnect from our body, we can't get the emotions that are stirred up out. We don't know what's happening. So that's a possible option. Another possible option is that we over rely on our frontal lobes and we start to try and make sense of what's happening. Whatever is happening to them, I would never want to happen to me. So there must be some reason that we've all decided it's okay to happen. This is okay to happen to them, right? In Game of Thrones, it's because he left his post, and that is just like the most end of the world thing that could ever happen, right? So he deserves it, right? He deserves whatever is happening. People who are being starved, who are being locked up in inhumane conditions, who are being beaten, right? They must deserve that, right? Because that's not an appropriate thing to happen to me as a human. So they must be so different in some way that they deserve what is happening. And they must be so different than me to deserve that type of treatment is like a sneeze away from they're lesser than me. All right. And we really see this with oppression and bias just historically and also currently. There is often a dehumanization of the outgroup. They're animals, vermin, monkeys, whatever, right? They're less than human because humans don't deserve this treatment, but they do. Excuse me. Frontal lobes working overtime to try and deal with the energy and the harm that the mirror neurons is like, oh my God, this is awful. It's like, no, 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 shh, they're different. It's okay, right? But what all of this does, it enforces bias, right? Because bias is all about this in-group, out-group. So it's really enforcing an in-group versus out-group. And we have trauma being stored in the body, right? Because mirror neurons are getting activated. They're feeling pain, anger, anguish, whatever. But we're not doing anything with that. So now it's getting stored in the body. And here we go, right? This is the recipe for bigotry. right? Because now the body and the brain are associating this in-group, out-group, whatever these two groups are, with this survival, like, in the body, this anguish, right? And that I have to be different or else I will feel this anguish too. It's just like a running away from that anguish. And when we look at that over large societal and generational scales, right, policies are made from these mindsets, right? They are wild and dangerous, which means if given the chance, they'll come for us. So now we need to write policies to make sure they don't come for us, right? And now we're looking at systemic oppression. So taking a step back, I think it's really important to or to just generally speaking, know that supremacy, patriarchy, oppression, capitalism, all of these things that support in groups and out groups, that have narratives of this other whatever is going to harm us, that is threatening survival. So now emotion brain is getting activated and we're not logically thinking things through with our values. All of that is just a trauma response. And I don't know if you've ever worked with someone with trauma and you just said, oh, why don't you just get over it, right? Not super helpful. So when we're talking about oppression and bias and we say, just don't be racist, just don't be homophobic, that's not super helpful. Right? That's like, if it was, our world probably wouldn't look the way it does right now, right? We need to actually understand that there is a lot of neurological and physiological things happening. It is a trauma response, and we need to have that same compassion and firmness and boundaries that we have with intense trauma presentations with these types of things. And so I will talk more about what this looks like in sessions because it's quite insidious. But first, are there any questions or thoughts about this? Okay, everything's making sense. Good, good. I feel like sometimes these things, there's like so many different pieces, and we're just like bringing them all together. I like to think of it as the trauma elephant, like that parable. Um, yeah, of I see y'all do nodding, but for anyone who doesn't know, the parable of the blind man with the elephant, right? It's a whole bunch of different blind dudes. They're like, oh my gosh, we've never experienced an elephant. And the elephant walked down the street, and they all touch a different part of the elephant. And then they're like just arguing with each other forever because the dude who touched the trunk is like, oh, this is like uh, a tree trunk, or something. And the dude who touched the tail is like, no, it's like a snake. And there's like, bro, what are you talking about? Right? But none of them have the whole picture. That's trauma, right? So we can get really into the neurological, the hormones, chemicals, and I love all that stuff. But that's just one part of the trauma elephant, because then we talk about how it affects us interpersonally, right, and at work, and generationally, and societally, right? It's just a much bigger thing.
I think it's interesting to hear you. I really like that explanation, Jaden, too, because as I think about kind of what you're talking about, all of those different elements of this trauma, thinking about in our lives as well, of like which pieces of our life kind of get exposed to which pieces of our trauma, and which people might know different parts, and maybe somebody knows that that's the entire elephant, and maybe nobody knows the entire elephant. I think just kind of having that awareness too of when clients are showing up for us, they may be giving us a piece of that or a part of that at a time, if ever fully together. So I really like that visual.
Yeah, absolutely. I go with the underlying assumption that we'll never know the whole part because, and this is just quick tangent of nerdiness, I'm also like really into physics and specifically like quantum mechanics. Also, astrophysics is really cool. But if we look at quantum mechanics and particle physics, what we know is when two molecules interact, they're imprinted, right? So, every molecule that our molecules have ever interacted with, there's the imprintation and also the ability for simultaneous communication. So like the rules of light speed don't apply. So think of when you have a bad feeling and want to call a loved one. Then turns out right at that moment they got into a car accident, right? That's one of those times where there's been an imprinting of your molecules because you interacted before and it was connected. And then I think about the fact that our molecules are stardust, right? How much of the universe is imprinted within us? Like that's so much information that we can access like in a moment, in an instant, if we do like the deep meditation work to do it, right? But like just from this is not even the woo, like there's a woo Jaden. I'm keeping woo Jaden out of this. This is straight up physics. It's so cool, right? And so there's no way we could ever know the whole elephant because we don't know what our molecules that existed 20 billion years ago as a nebula were interacting with and any harm that came to them. Um, so it can be overwhelming, but it's also a great way to stay curious and humble. Um, and make sure you don't, as clinicians, it can be easy to be like, oh, I know what's happening. At least for me, because I'm gonna have a whole bunch of all these specialties and whatnot. And I'm like, I know what's happening, right? But to be able to stay humble and be like, actually, I don't know what's happening because I could never have enough knowledge to really know everything, which makes me ask different questions and helps the clients reflect as well. So, okay, end tangent. So we talked about the physiological connection of oppression and trauma. So what do we do with that? So remember, empathy is the opposite of trauma. When we are experiencing empathy, we are not experiencing trauma and vice versa. So if we want to heal from trauma, that means we have to have an empathetic approach, which makes sense. We're social creatures. We're built to connect, and we see this all the time in society. Love conquers everything. More importantly, more accurately, empathy is, I would say, it's what heals everything. Empathy is how we move forward. And when I say empathy, I don't just mean like a forgive and forget, right? I'm a big fan of compassionate accountability. So, my clients, they do not get far with excuses for me, but I felt excuse you. And we're letting your feelings like drive the ship here? No, 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 no. Where's your logic? Where's your values? Right? I'm gonna hold you accountable in a very compassionate way to meeting your goals. Um, but empathy, understanding one another is key. Now, big barrier here is safety. You must have safety first because if your body is ever worried about surviving, it's going to focus on that first. It cares more about that and it will, you can try and fight your body, but it will win, right? So we have to establish safety first, whether that is your environment, grounding skills, um, conceptualizations, whatever, but we have to find the safety first. And once we have that, we can, we can work on the empathy part. And yeah, cool. So now, okay, that was a lot. I just want to invite everyone, if you are like, normally I would have a break here, but the whole like CE thing, we have to go for the full 3 hours. So just, check in with yourself, take some deep breaths, talking about like oppression and trauma and all that stuff, like that can be a lot. Um, might bring up some memories and some thoughts that are uncomfortable. I referenced the state of the world, which is just like uncomfortable in general. So whatever you need to do, take care of yourself, some movement, some breathing, grab some water, eat some food. How is your blood sugar? Y'all eat this morning? It's early for y'all. Y'all get a snack. If you haven't gotten a snack yet, I want you to get something that's quick sugar and a protein. That's a great combo to make sure you can feel fueled quickly but then not crash afterward. So like a couple sips of juice, and like I don't know, a meat stick. I'm like forgetting what are common things in the United States. Um, quick accessible protein. Get a little Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich or something. Treat yourself. Carbs are important. If you're like, oh, no, carbs, sugar, carbs are important. Your nervous system, exclusively fueled by carbs. If you don't have enough carbs, your body just takes protein, either from your diet or from your muscles, and turns it into carbs. So have a good base of carbs, then have your protein. It's a balancing act. I won't go into nutrition science right now, but please take care of yourself and make sure you've eaten something this morning. And last thing, small tangent, if you're someone who's like, well, when I wake up, I'm just not hungry, that's likely because your blood sugar is dropping, and when it drops, adrenaline spikes, which shuts down your digestive system and makes you feel not hungry. And then it just keeps dropping down until you have no energy. You feel super sluggish. And then, oh gosh, do you just drink coffee to undo the sluggishness feeling and then probably produce more adrenaline? Maybe. This is not intended to be a call out. I'm saying this because I care about you and your body. Eat some food in the morning, even if it's just some juice. Okay, so going from that possibly unpleasant conversation for you to white supremacy as a trauma response, which I don't know, which one would you take? But you did sign up for this one, so I will go ahead and move on. So, recognizing white supremacy as a trauma response. So, um, I am going to just use everything that is like racism, bigotry, transphobia, homophobia, internalized kind like all of that. I like to just like sum up as white supremacy. One, because I made this training originally like 2021, 2022, and that was like the vibe at the time, and two, because I don't want to have to like say all of those things each time. And this is one that is like very relevant for a lot of people. So this is not me trying to like pick on white people or comfort like anyone. It's just kind of the most widely known and accepted, like, I might have to explain to someone why internalized capitalism is part of a trauma, like is part of this. And I'm not gonna really do this right now, but white supremacy is, we can probably all agree on it. Um, but there are a lot of aspects of white supremacy that are a trauma response. There is a PDF that went around in like nonprofits in 2020 after George Floyd that had these characteristics, and dig it up later if needed. But this is okay. These are framed as characteristics of white supremacy, but I really want to kind of ground them in an dysregulated nervous system, or a nervous system that is outside of its window of tolerance, and a brain that is shutting down is the logic brain, right? And moving into black and white thinking, and really specifically this idea that your body is afraid it's going to die. The body is always worried it's going to die. Like, if you just want to understand humans, the body thinks it's going to die. Like, that's the answer. Why is this happening? Someone's body thinks it's going to die. That is the answer, right? But when we talk about trauma response, that is actually what's going on. And it sounds really dramatic, but the body is all about survival. So if it thinks it's going to die, it's going to highlight that, right? And it's going to, um, be overly cautious. So some examples here, shoulds. We see this in therapy sessions all the time. I should do this. I should do that, right? There's nothing you should do. Again, the only thing you have to do is die. Everything else is a choice, and a weighing of pros and cons, helpful versus harmful. Um, you'll see this as, oh, I should respond to this text message, or I should go to brunch with my mom, or I should just get over it. And a lot of times I like to ask, okay, no, we'll get into strategies later. But that should, it really takes out the nuanced thinking. A lot of times if I ask a client why they should, there's like, well, because I should, right? And I'm like, that is not an explanation. You know, I am autistic and ADHD, so I love just being like, I don't know what you're talking about. Explain it to me. I don't get it. Which is a lot of my experience, but like I do use it to my advantage in therapy. Please explain it to me. Why should you do that? Because the only thing you have to do is die. So why should you do this particular thing? And if they can't come up with an answer, that tells me it's not a value-oriented thing. Someone's told them probably that they should. They feel like they should, or else. But when we really start to break that down, you find out there's a lot more behind those shoulds. Perfectionism, man, I don't know what it is about like white supremacy culture where there's this idea that you just shoot out your mom's vagina, like knowing everything you're ever going to need to know for the rest of your life. And if at any point in time that's not true, you're a failure and you're going to burn in hell forever, like, whoa, you know? So, um, usually when I start poking at perfectionism, and like why people expect themselves to have a certain level, it really goes back, or sorry, a certain level of expertise or skill in anything. It often goes back to, like societal expectations, or like really childhood and what their parents were telling them that they needed to be able to do, or some like core beliefs of like um, a a good daughter is one that can always anticipate the mom's needs, right? So if you're not perfect at that, then you're a bad daughter. And then you have the feelings of shame around being a bad daughter that might put you outside of your window of tolerance. So whenever there's that perfectionism piece, which shows up in a lot of different ways, um, that I like to view as a trauma response, because there's probably some nervous system activation happening there. We already talked a bit about overly logical arguments, right? And that disconnecting from our emotion brain. You'll see this a lot in therapy with caring a lot about the word choice. Um, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. It's my favorite because no one wants to feel angry, apparently, which is wild to me because the world is infuriating. But I will pull out the emotion wheel and I'm like, you see how frustration is under anger, is a subcategory? You're right, I don't know every specific nuance of your feeling. So when I speak, I'm going to use the general category, and you can feel free to like, use whatever subcategory you want. But like what we're not going to do is just back and forth and like getting into an argument over one word choice versus another. I also see this a lot with couples. Had a mixed neural type couples. This is a really good one. But I'm thinking a couple. One time, someone like misspoke and they were arguing about bills and said rent instead of mortgage. Of like, I don't even know what you're gonna do if you're even gonna pay the rent. And then immediately was like, I mean mortgage. And then the other person was like, I don't pay rent. I pay mortgage. Do you not even believe that I own this house? And da 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 da. And I was like, oh my, like we knew what she meant. this is not the important piece here, you know. Um, but that it feels really important because for the body, for the nervous system, if you don't focus on this other word, this other thing, then you have to focus on what is being said and how you feel about it. And that is way too dangerous, right? So it's a little distraction technique. And some clients are really good at it, right? They're really good at dancing around the what you're trying to get at, um, and not like kind of answering the question and then oscillating. Those are my favorite because I grew up with all cluster B family members, and so I'm like, it won't work with me. Black and white thinking, again, we talked a bit about this with the body thinks it's going to die, life or death. But in the sessions, it often looks like, well, I either have to do this or that, right? A lot of therapists, we know black and white thinking. But I think the important thing to remember is when you see it, that lets you know that nervous system's getting activated and probably some stuff neurologically is happening, right? Emotion brain might be getting a bit activated as well. And just to be clear, when I say emotion brain is getting activated, it's not like a flip of a switch, right? Emotion brain's activated, logic brain turns off, right? It's more of like dimmers, and then at some point, right, you've surpassed your window of tolerance. So you can kind of watch someone's emotion brain get activated, and depending on their distress tolerance, like this switch is not moving too much, right? But if they have really low distress tolerance, you get activated a little bit, high distress tolerance, you can do this much emotional activation and have that much like logic brain deactivation. It really just depends on the client. Um, but the point is, when I say emotional activation, like something's happening, it's just something to watch out for, right? Know what forces are at play and be on the watch out for any like full logic brain shut offs. Comfort over conflict. Okay. So everyone wants to feel good all the time. I always tell my clients, like, healing's not fun. Like, no one likes healing, right? We like to be healed, but healing's not fun. Or when people will just be like, I like doing hard things. I rarely see that. People like having hard things finished. They like the accomplishment afterwards, but they complain all the way through doing the hard thing, right? It's not enjoyable. And it doesn't need to be enjoyable. Not everything needs to be enjoyable. You don't need to conceptualize some reason to be grateful that you're feeling sad. If I'm feeling grief right now at the state of the world, that tells me that I'm not dissociating and I'm connected to my body and I can feel gratitude. Like, sure, yes. And it's okay to just feel icky sometimes. We don't always need to like spin it. Um, and so I think there's this whole issue with comfort, us not really liking to be uncomfortable and perceiving discomfort as a lack of safety, right? If you are uncomfortable, if you're feeling unpleasant emotions, that you're unsafe. And that really comes up when we add in the conflict piece, right? So, okay, if I am not comfortable and I'm perceiving discomfort as a lack of safety, and then I'm in conflict with another person, and that's what's making me uncomfortable. Now this other person's unsafe, right? And we see this all the time. Well, I don't know if I feel safe with them. Why not? Why not? As a Black person, I get this a lot. I'm also like, I'm 5'9" and like muscular and like also like my weight fluctuates. So like sometimes like larger and even when I'm thinner, like I'm still muscular. So like I'm just like a bigger person and I'm also masculine presenting. Oh, if I don't make people feel comfortable, they're like, are you going to kill me? The amount of I once got into an argument with someone who's threatening to call the cops on me in my own home because I was standing in my living room. So this was a whole different. It's just like this person was very dysregulated. But my arm was in a sling because I messed up my rotator cuff. Had one arm in a sling, the other hand recording them because I was like, whoa, this is wild. And then they're like, I want to call the cops because you're threatening me and I'm too unsafe right now. And I'm like, you're in my house. What? And how am I going to harm you? Both of my arms are occupied. I'm in a sling, right? But they didn't feel comfortable, right? They didn't feel comfortable and they were in a conflict. So then they felt that they were unsafe, but there wasn't actually unsafety. And so really starting to tease out when people are taking discomfort and viewing that as unsafety. Well, I don't know if it's really safe for me to have that conversation. Do you think they're going to physically harm you? Well, no, no, no. I might get upset. That's not unsafe. You're not going to die from being like upset, right? This is important because if the body thinks it's going to die, if that's the internal monologue, then it's going to operate with nervous system activated and logic brain turned off. So we really, really want to address that. A lot of paternalism and saviorism. Um, you'll see this, I mean, as clinicians, we can see this a lot, right? Why won't my clients just do what I tell them to do, right? Because we want to have control, because not having control, right, makes us feel like we're going to die. Uh, you'll see this when people's friends are upset that, or like a client is upset that their friends aren't listening to them, or parents are upset when their children aren't doing what they suggested. Like this comes out in a lot of different ways, but whenever there's this indication for someone to do something the way you want them to do it, and that feels really activating, probably a trauma response, probably like nervous system is getting activated. It's like, why does it matter to you so much that they do it this particular way? It's okay to be upset, annoyed, frustrated, irritated, right? But you're like ranting about it for 15 minutes in session. So like that kind of tells me there's some activation happening. Individualism. In short, individualism, it's not empathy oriented. And empathy is the opposite of trauma, right? So when people get hyper individualistic, trauma response, typically speaking. A lot of times they will start to get activated when like you suggest some sort of empathetic or communal approach. You'll see that, oh no, 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 that can't happen. You'll see changes in their speech or body language. Cool. Nervous system's getting activated. And then like the scarcity mindset, right? And this goes back to um, someone else might get what I am getting or what I want. And that can be love, it can be food, it can be attention, it could be a lot of different things. But that particular one, that last bullet can really endorse a in-group, out-group dynamic in the brain and start that whole neurological process of distance. So examples of how all of these things look in session, because it's generally not like you're talking about race or like or gender or anything like that, and then like, oh my gosh, this big thing has come up, right? Like it's much more subtle, right? And I think it's important to start to learn to look for these subtleties. So as you see them, here are ways to combat them, right? So whenever I hear a should, nope, is it helpful versus harmful, right? There's nothing you should or should not do. It's actually like super annoying. So I developed this skill working with my clients. I originally specialized with borderline personality disorder. If that gives any context for my approaches and how I say things sometimes. And then obviously then complex trauma and then holistic health. But Uh, yes, there's nothing you should or should not do, just what's helpful versus harmful. So if you are trying to, I think I'm trying to remember why I just brought up that, like, the borderline personality. I feel like I had a thing that I was gonna say, and then it just left. So like I recognize that that sounded like, what's that gotta do anything? I don't know either. Okay. So but helpful versus harmful. Um, there's nothing you should or should not do. And I want to talk about this because there's like truly nothing. Let's talk about murder, right? We both usually all agree that murdering is something you shouldn't do, right? That seems like a no-brainer until you ask people if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you? Right? Or if you ask people their opinions on the death penalty, or about their opinions on abortion, or about cultural differences with murder or suicide, right? Suicide bombing, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name, Japanese culture when you've like dishonored your family, um, euthanasia, assisted euthanasia for humans. Everyone has different opinions about this, which is my point, right? Not getting into that, right? But my point is people have different opinions about this. It's not clear cut what you should or should not do. So if it is not clear cut of that we should or should not murder people, then like, should you text your mom back? Like, I think you can give yourself a little bit of grace, right? How you respond to people, what skills you use, right? All of it is a helpful versus harmful thing. If you want to text someone, if you want to have a difficult conversation, how should you do that? Well, what's going to be most helpful? Depends on your goal. If your goal is you want to inform them that you've been hurt, what's most helpful is going to be different than if you want to make a plan going forward for how you don't for that to not happen again. And that's also going to be different than if your goal is to tell them about themselves. You don't really care about accountability. You just want to go off on them, right? What is most helpful versus harmful really just depends on the goals, the situation, your capacity at the time, a lot of different factors. This is really good because since there's so many different factors, it's really hard to think through that if logic brain is shut off, right? So thinking through these things can help us get from emotion brain to logic brain. When we see a lot of perfectionism, then I really like to talk about the journey or the like just like the process of things and really kind of unpacking like why is it so important that the end goal looks like this, right? Um, and what happens, like what are some possible outcomes if it looks slightly different, right? And what are three different ways we could get to this goal, right? Five different pathways. Analogies are great here. You're driving from New York to Seattle, and then there's a wildfire, and you have to detour down into the southwest. That doesn't mean you fail because it's not a perfect journey. The important thing is to keep trying to go to New York or Seattle, I forget which one's the destination. Right? But like, how can you start to find ways for them to connect with the journey and the process? And this is one of those things that often needs to be brought up again and again and again. Because whenever we're talking about patience, right, that's a skill that requires time. And dopamine and validation along the way can really help. So if you can kind of keep reinforcing over time, that yes, you're on this journey. Where are you in the journey? Right? Sometimes I'll have people like I'll draw a little map, and I'm like, okay, this is where you are. This is where you want to go. This is where you were last week. Where are you this week? Right? Did you go here? Did you get all the way over here? Are you up there? Right? It doesn't need to make a ton of sense, right? But the idea is for them to realize that um, they're still going And then to reinforce that, get them those little dopamine reward hits along the way. When we're talking about logical arguments, intent is the biggest thing, right? When I gave that mortgage versus a rent example, like clearly the intent was talking about like paying bills, right? So whenever you start to see that overly logical word emphasis thing going on, you can even like pause and say like, what is your intent with this, right? And make them think about that. Um, yes. Uh, okay. Black and white thinking. Yes. Middle ground and compromise nuance, right? This is creativity really helps here. So finding like creative solutions and creative thinking and fostering creative thinking. Oftentimes when we're surviving, it's just life or death. But thriving is all about how do you live, right? What is a way to feel good about how you're living? And to do that, you have to think of it creatively about the world that you want, right? Because if you only live a life that other people have told you to live, right? One, probably getting into shoulds. Two, you're probably disconnected from your body because we're not listening to your internal feedback. And three, you it's just very limiting, right? So like for example, I'm non-monogamous. And I don't think everyone should be non-monogamous because it's hard. But I do wish it was something that more people knew about because I've worked with so many people who think that monogamy and a particular version of monogamy is the only way to be in a relationship. And if they struggle with that, then they're failing and a terrible person. So maybe it's not about you. Maybe we can just talk about different ways to be in a relationship. Like that's okay. I moved to Spain. People are like, I can't do that. Why not? Yes, you can. Like we limit ourselves all of the time. And what if we just, followed our biggest dreams, right? What is your biggest dream? What would it look like to get there? Um, I tell my clients all the time, like, I'm not interested in helping you um, be who your parents told you to be, because your parents aren't my client. I'm interested in helping you be who you want to be. So let's think creatively together about what that looks like. But creativity, like any other thing, is something that has to be practiced. So um, drawing exercises, music exercises, like movement, anything, any ways you can bring creativity into session, that can be super helpful here. Um, Comfort over conflict. So I like to talk a lot about growth and discomfort. I'm a personal trainer as well, so I use a lot of gym analogies. I'm honestly surprised I've made it this far in this training without saying any. It's just like maybe a record for me. Um, but when you're working out, the growth happens while you rest, right? Go in, you pump the iron, and you rest in between sets. And then you rest in between days of working out. You don't work out the same muscles every single day, right? You have to rest. Same thing happens when we're sleeping, right? We learn new information, we consume information throughout the day, we incorporate that during our sleep. So rest is super important. Um, so I talk a lot about the that growth and discomfort. We have to make ourselves uncomfortable at the gym. And then we rest afterwards to really integrate all of those things. Both of those things are super important because some people will just like, I have to be uncomfortable all the time now. Okay, no. Right? That's also black and white. Uh, so how can you find growth and discomfort whenever you are in discomfort? Like, how can you make that a growth opportunity? And then rest to help emphasize that growth. I don't think that, we all go through trauma for a reason, but I do think that we can turn our trauma into something beneficial, right? And it depends on our relationship to the trauma and how we allow ourselves to rest and grow from it. If we just think of something as beating us down, then we don't have the growth mindset. So, for example, the reason I became a therapist. I was 8th grade and home life, not great. And I just started my period. So like, whoa, it was a wild time, middle school. Um, and there was a girl. It was like the after school program, little after school snacks. And this was like, I don't know, pretty empty table. I sit down. We're not friends, me and this person. I don't even remember her name. And I'm just like, hey, how you doing? Because small talk's what you're supposed to do, right? Supposed to. And then she's like, yeah, I'm probably gonna go home and kill myself. I'm like, oh, okay, wow. But fortunately for her and for me and for everyone here, I had just come out of a super suicidal phase, like maybe a month before that. And so we were able to have a really good conversation about like not killing yourself. And the next day, she comes back to school and she's like, hey, thank you so much for talking to me. I don't know if I would be here um, if it weren't for you. And in that moment, I realized, oh, all of the trauma I go through, it doesn't have to be for nothing. I can learn from my experiences and then use that to help others. Because I knew I was really strong and I knew I was resilient and I knew I could figure it out. But I would struggle with the motivation to do that, right? Sometimes it's just hard. And I was like a child. So, but that was the motivation I needed. So then every time life got really, really hard, I was extra motivated to figure it out because I was like, if I can just learn from this, then I can use this to help other people, right? It was all about my relationship to my trauma. Would I have loved to just like not have gone through all the trauma? Like, yes. Like, do I feel like I needed to go through all that trauma to be a good therapist? No, absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is, I did, right? That was my experience, that was my life. And I could have let that break me, and I almost did. Or I could have let it grow, right? And that required introspection and rest and a relationship to discomfort that was more motivating than destructive. Okay. So when we start getting into like saviorism and paternalism, I really like to focus on support, right? We And this is a great way to like increase empathy. We all know what it feels like when someone's giving us advice and we don't want it, right? And so when people start getting upset about not being able to save others, I like to ask, like, what does supporting them look like then, right? If what you're doing is not helpful, what does support actually look like? And if they don't know the answer to the question, then that's a really good time to ask the person instead of assuming you know what's best for them. Individualism, social healing. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Um, practicing empathy, practicing being in relationship and in community. I absolutely believe that most healing happens in community because community requires empathy, right? And being able to engage in an empathetic way and not only in a trauma survival way. And since trauma is the opposite of empathy, if we can engage in empathy and community like existing, right, that's more time that we are spending outside of a trauma um, state, right? And outside of a nervous system activation state. And the last thing here is an abundance mindset for when we get into a scarcity mindset. I do want to be really clear here that I am talking about mindset, not resources. So if someone like is broke, doesn't have food, telling them to just manifest abundance, like shut up. I'm sorry, but no, like we're not doing that. Safety first, survival first, Maslow's, right? And then thriving. So um, make sure they have their resources before we start talking about abundance. But given that they are safe, like survival is checked off, they have resources, then we can start talking about, having an abundance mindset and specifically like what are they afraid of losing? Are you afraid of losing love? Are you afraid of losing friends? Are you afraid of losing your job? Right? And then we can reality test We can make plans, right? Because maybe these are decent fears, right? Maybe they're realistic. Okay, so then what do we do about that, right? Um, but I wanted to really go through and spend a lot of time with these two slides because this is the crux of therapy, right? This is what we see in, sorry, that was dramatic, the crux of therapy. Wow. No. But like when we talk about like oppression as a trauma response, this is how we see it in sessions most of the time. And so I want y'all to feel like really comfortable, at least thinking through these things and maybe thinking of like when these things come up with your clients, and or your like personal life and would you, give different advice to yourself or friends or clients from a perspective that, this thing happened and it's probably like my nervous system was activated or my brain, like emotion brain was getting activated, right? Does like that make you engage with this any differently? Would you choose to do things any differently? Would you want someone else to respond to you differently? Um, just I think this is really important. So, any questions about this? All right. So, wow, that was a lot. So, we're going to talk a little bit about moving energy through our body, and I'm sure you might need it at this point in time. So, first, I want to give you a few options for a body scan, and I'll give you a little bit to do a body scan in silence, but I want to walk through these options because there's a lot of clients who do not like body scans for a very good reason, right? Because there's a lot of traumatic energy in the body. So if you have clients who really struggle with body scans, or you yourself struggle with body scans, I want to offer a few alternatives. So as you're doing a body scan, one thing you could do is add in light or colors, right? So as you notice your feet, like what color would you assign it? Um, and or what color do you want it to be, right? Maybe you want to feel green. Um, and so you have, green start from your feet and come all the way up, and that's what you're aware of. If you want to take that an extra step, maybe you notice that your feet feel blue, and then you like watch the blue fade into green, and then you do that all the way up. We like the colors really don't matter, right? I mean, like they can, but they really don't have to. So people get like, which color? Like, doesn't matter. In another way, massage or touch, right? So a lot of times being aware of your body is really uncomfortable. So providing some release through massage or touch can be super helpful. And then similarly, stretching, right? So going through your whole body and doing some stretching. Progressive muscle relaxation, if you're familiar, is also a really good option, but I wanted to just provide some alternatives. And so I'm going to ask all of y'all to take like 30 seconds, 40 seconds to just check in with your body. Okay. So after that, you hopefully have a decent idea of how your body's feeling. And most specifically, if you feel like you have a lot of energy or not much energy, right? You're super tired and it's the morning, or maybe it's just like, oh, very activating. So I want to give some uh, tools to help manage energy. I do a lot of work with using movement, many other things to manage their nervous system fluctuations. So I'm gonna raise my desk up because in true ADHD fashion, I do have a standing desk. And the first thing I want to teach is for those who maybe have a little bit of you're on the lower energy, you want it to come up. So I'm doing this one first because if anyone goes too far, then we will do one to calm it down a little bit in a second. But what I want to teach right now is breath of joy. And if you are someone who's like often highly anxious or have hypertension, just be really careful with this one. Maybe only do one aspect of it until you see how your body feels. It's super effective. This is great for hypoarousal, super depressed clients, whatever. So, two parts here. There's the physical piece. So your arms are going to come out, front, up, and then you will bend over. So if you're in a chair, you can just fold over your legs in your chair. If you're standing, right, you can do a full forward fold. Um, and yeah, so out, front, up, and down. And now we're going to pair that with breath. So inhales, hyperarousal, exhales, hypoarousal. More energy, lower energy. So we want to increase the energy. We want to focus on our inhale. So we're going to go inhale, 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 exhale. A nice big exhale, like a lion's breath or a ha breath. A lion's breath, your tongue comes out like, and a ha breath is like a ha, right? Really, we don't want you to hyperventilate, so get that air out of your lungs while you do all these inhales. But you can do this as many times as you want. I don't really need more energy, so I'm not going to super do this, but this is a really good one for clients or for yourself. Long work day, you need to pick me up and you don't want to use coffee or just one more client, right? This is super effective. If you really need a boost, you can try speeding it up as you go along. So starting slow, like in, out, in, out, in, out, in, to see how fast you can go. And then you're usually laughing. It gets really goofy. So that's fun. So that's something you can use at any point if you feel like you need some more energy. If you would like to release some energy, you're feeling a little up. I'll do two shaky things. So one is called knocking on heaven's door, where you're shifting your weight side to side, with a slight bending your knees so you don't hurt yourself, right? And then you're just kind of letting your arms swing. So I'll actually lower this so you can see what my torso is doing, my arms. You see, it's kind of just flopping. You can turn your head as you do this. And if you need some extra grounding, you can try and notice a new thing every time you turn your head. So orienting response can be super helpful. And that one's really nice too, because if you're feeling up, you can kind of start doing it faster and then again, slow it down. I also really like that for people who struggle with control and or have like a lot of tension, because it's really a safe way to kind of lose control, even if it is just like your hands and your arms. The other thing that you can do, it's actually just like shake things out. I know we didn't talk much about the peripheral nervous system, but it's activated, right? So like shaking out, I like to even sometimes visualize like icky drops coming from my hands. And then turning in circles. Don't get too dizzy, but that can also be a really fun thing to do, especially with clients. Like, we're just gonna, I don't know if you can tell this, but I'm a big goofball in my therapy sessions. Um, But all of those things are down regulating. So twist and turning in circles and peripheral shaking, those help settle the nervous system. Okay. So then if I usually have this on here, but it's not, so I'm just going to throw it in. If you need some focus, right, balance poses are really good. And so I like to do just a basic tree pose. And I'm just gonna come down as it lowers, and I'm gonna lower it all the way down so you can kind of see what's happening in my feet. But really, any balance pose is okay. So, oh, it does not go as far down as I want to. So typically tree pose, the feet might be up here. But you can also do it with your foot on your shin, calf area below the knee, or you can even do it with like your toes on the ground still. So like your foot doesn't actually have to come fully off the ground if you really struggle with balance. But whatever feels like a balance challenge to you or your clients is a really great way to focus, because if you're ever really trying to balance and you're not focused, you're gonna fall, right? And our bodies don't really distinguish between like physical health and mental health the way that we do. So if we're balanced or if we're focusing in our body, it makes it easier to focus with our brains. Also, just a fun fact, balance, which is processed in like the vestibular area of the brain, takes a lot of energy. So if you have clients who have really bad balance and are also like constantly tired and having trouble focusing, having them do a balance pose once a day can be super helpful. Um, okay. I'm also going to talk a little bit about mindful movement. And yes, okay. And so that can be another great way to like have focus and start to build this mind-body connection, which I think is super important again when we're dealing with trauma, because all the feels inside the body. Um, but excuse me, having some sort of prompt or direction while moving can be super helpful. So one thing I'll often do is I'll say, do an inhale while circling your neck one way, and then exhale while doing it the other. So inhale and exhale. You can do this really with any movement, shoulder circles, an inhale and exhale. I like to focus on the neck and shoulders, one, because it's easy to see in Zoom, but also because we store a lot of emotional energy and tension in our necks and shoulder area. And when our necks experience tension, it kind of like toggles on like the nervous system, a part of the nervous system, and like activates it. I'm not going to go into the details, but neck tension equals more nervous system activation. So we can release the tension. It helps the nervous system settle. And I often will cue this of like how your inhale and your exhale, stop at the completion of the circle. So I don't want you completing your inhale while you're still up here, right? How can you pace the inhale for the entirety of the circle? And then how can you pace the exhale for the entirety of that circle, right? So by now, you shouldn't have any more exhale left. And this is harder than it looks, but a great way to start to again really connect the mind and the body. Um, I work with a lot of people who just struggle with mindfulness in the body. So these are just like fun and accessible ways to do that. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the ultradian rhythm, which focuses more on the brain than this is like a bad name for it. So please ignore the name. I need to update it. It's breathing through your nostril. It's more brain than nervous system. But I love this. It's so cool. So if all of y'all just plug one nostril and you inhale, and then you plug another nostril and you inhale, one of them felt more open. Yeah, Whichever one felt more open, the contralateral side of your brain is more active. So if your left nostril felt more open, the right side of your brain is more active, and you're more suited for creative thinking or taking a nap. If your right nostril is more open, then the left side of your brain is more active. And that is more suited for, you know, logical thinking, functioning stuff. I didn't actually fully do that, but based off of that last sentence, probably the right side of my brain is more active. Um, so this can be really helpful if you are backing up. So our brains switch side dominance every 90 to 120 minutes. So that really sucks when you're trying to sit down and work for 8 hours in a day. Um, but it also maybe gives some context to your daily rhythms and patterns. If you're ever wanting to switch sides of the brain temporarily, then you can just plug the nostril and breathe through the desired side. So if I wanted my left side of my brain to be open, I would breathe through my right nostril. Honestly, it usually takes like 20 seconds, but you can give it up to a minute, 90 seconds of breathing through that nostril, and you'll feel the moment where your nostril opens. I do not recommend like huffing your way through like productivity to just try and work more. But it can be helpful if you have like one last session, or if you're trying to go to sleep and you want your right side of the brain to be active, anything like that. And then a very common technique, right, that you could do if you kind of just want to regulate what's going on in your brain is to switch back and forth. So you may have seen this one before. It's very popular in yoga, where you plug one nostril, you inhale, and then you switch, and then you exhale. And then you inhale, and you switch, and then you exhale. And so you are switching after each inhale. Um, yeah, so some fun tools for you to play around with and offer your clients. Um, Often if I'm like doing a whole bunch of intense traumatic or trauma work, I'm like, okay, let's do something with that energy because again, we don't want it to store. All right. So we've gone over a lot of the science, the why, the info. Now I want to talk a bit more about like how do we use this in practice? So what to expect, what do you do? And we're going to go over a lot more skills. So whenever we are talking about uh, doing trauma work, which includes bias and oppression work, right? There are some expected reactions because the nervous system is activated and emotion brain is activated and logic brain is shutting down and your body thinks it's going to die, right? So I think it's really important to remember that these things are going to come up because when we're not prepared, we can be taken off guard, right? And all of a sudden you're like, why is my client responding this way? Or what's going on? Or are you okay? Like it can be confusing at best and or like insulting at worst, right? A client might say some stuff to you or just go off on you. You're like, where did that come from? Right? Probably some traumatic energy got activated, right? Emotion brain is active. And so, um, yeah, my favorite is actually fawn responses. I think I see that the most. Because we are in positions of power. When clients all of a sudden just keep agreeing with me, they're not like really having a conversation with me anymore. They're just like, yep, that makes sense. Yeah, sure. Yep. What's happening in your body? Tell me three sensations right now. I don't trust that. Why are you agreeing with me so much? And I say I pick on that one because it can feel good for someone to just agree with us as clinicians. Um, but that is one to definitely watch out for. We can see when people are judging themselves or getting defensive, right? But we really need to know ourselves um, to be able to catch that fawn response. Um, and one thing, do I talk about? No, later. Okay, I'm gonna talk about it now. So one thing that I like to or one way I like to conceptualize this is the emotion river, right? So all of these things, yes, we can expect them, but I guess when does it start to become harmful, right? Because sometimes people get a little dissociated and it's not the end of the world. They're not like fully, um, shut down. But you can tell that, like, okay, this is getting difficult. And that doesn't mean we need to go in and save them, right? And we might want to remind them of some skills. Um, but it depends on the goal. Like, are we going back and forth from emotion brain and logic brain? Are we working on building distress tolerance of dealing with these feelings? So I don't want you to see these reactions and be like, oh no, nah, trauma, right? Okay. We're going, it can be helpful or harmful, and the intensity um, is a good indicator for that. So I like to think of it as the emotion river. Um, Whenever we're dealing with emotions, you have to cross this river, right? You gotta get wet, you gotta feel the feels. Some people like to just sit on the banks and observe the water. No, no, no. We got to get in the water. You got to feel the feels. But if we want to cross the emotion river, want to move through some things, all you need to do is like doggy paddle, you know, do a little free stroke across. Trauma processing, I usually liken it to a more underwater swim. Takes a bit more skill, a bit more strength, a bit more endurance. And you're going to be more tired afterwards and probably need a bit more care afterwards. Um, What you don't need to do is cannonball down into the bottom of the river and then get swept up in a current and then end up way downstream, head over heels, like panicking, right? And we've all seen that, right? We either personally or professionally, you start talking about something, someone just gets so overwhelmed and it's like really hard to pull them out of that, right? They just got swept up in the river. Other times people might just tread water, right? And they're not really doing anything with their feelings. Just like, I'm gonna feel sad today. And then they're just like, like sad all day. You're not moving through anything. Your skin's just getting pruny and itchy. Like it's not a vibe, right? And then you just get out and you haven't processed anything. You haven't moved through anything. Um, so I like to offer that conceptualization to clients, but also for clinicians of how much capacity do you have to go deep in the emotion river with a client today? I mean, sometimes if it's my third client of the day and I just had two back-to-back like intense trauma processing sessions, I probably do not have it in me to stay super present for that third session. So I'm gonna help them doggy paddle to the other side of the emotion river. But like I can't guide them through trauma processing. And I know that. I know about how much I can do, right? And I offer that for clients, like as we're going deeper into somatic work, like, hey, where are you in the emotion river? Do you feel like you're underwater swimming right now? Do you feel like you're getting too deep? Do you feel like you want to go deeper? Do you feel like you want to come up? Right? And giving them that choice and that autonomy. Oftentimes when we get into those lower depths, people feel like they don't have a choice. A lot of trauma also is related to power and control. So you want to find ways to give them that power and control as you're doing this processing. Um, Also, one thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning, before you jump into rivers, make sure you know how to swim, right? So I never do trauma processing right away with the client. People come to me, I want to talk about my trauma. I don't want to hear about it. I don't say it like that, right? But one, I don't know you like that, and you don't know me like that. And I want you to just trust me because I'm a therapist, because I could be a terrible therapist, right? Don't trust me with your deepest, darkest secrets and traumas. No, right? That is not developing secure attachment. I need to earn your trust, and I need to earn your nervous system's trust if I really want this to go well. And I also need to make sure that you know how to manage your emotions. You have distress tolerance and emotional regulation skills, right? Because if you're coming to me and you're already highly symptomatic, and then we throw you into deep emotion river, like your symptoms are probably just going to get worse, right? If you've ever done trauma processing on your own, you know it doesn't, man, I did acupuncture once and I was like, I mean, I've done it many times, but the first time I did, I was like, the fuck is this? And I was like, what is going, it was like for like a full week, I'm journaling, I'm talking to my therapist about it, and I'm like listening to all the symptoms, and I'm like, wait a minute, I know these symptoms. Is this trauma energy coming up? It was that acupuncture, right? But I was wrecked for like a week and a half, and I have a lot of skills. So, I think it's really important to make sure you trust your client and your client trusts you, um, to make sure you know how to swim and they know how to swim before you start jumping into the emotion river. All right. Now I want to talk about some cognitive skills. So again, I do not start somatic work right away. I mean, like, uh, somatic work is integrated in everything I do, but I don't do like deep somatic processing right away because I want to make sure that there is a solid foundation and a solid anchor. And that's our cognitions are the anchor. So yes, logic brain will turn off at points, and we want to be able to handle that. But if logic brain is turned on and it's still like not great thoughts, we need to address that first, and then we can get the body to catch up, right? If you logically truly believe that you are not deserving of love, addressing that somatically can be really dangerous, right? Because the idea is we get the mind and body to connect, right? And so I don't want to connect your body to the mind cognition of you're not deserving of love or that you're unsafe. Um, so let's address the cognitions first and then get the body to catch up. So some cognitive tools, talked a bit about helpful versus harmful already. I also like to talk a bit about worldviews and just like looking at how we conceptualize the world. Um, I'm a huge anthropology nerd. I feel like I just keep talking about like the different things that I'm nerdy about. It's a lot of things. But I took a anthropology of witchcraft, religion, and magic in undergrad, and changed my whole life, and here we are. So I really like to think about incompatible worldviews, in that one is not right or wrong, they're just different. I was visiting Morocco in July, and a lot of people were like, "Oh my gosh, Morocco, that's so dangerous and it's unsafe." And I was like, "Why?" And they're just like, "Oh, it's not safe for women." Why? Right? Is there racism and Islamophobia? Let me tell you, being in the crowded markets of Marrakesh did not feel any more dangerous than New York City. I think there's some dangers that come with like crowded places. Um, but it didn't feel unsafe to me. Um, there was catcalling, had to watch my pockets, but like, I mean, that's a city. But there are definitely cultural differences there, right? Um, the bubble, personal space bubble, very small, very small. So if you feel threatened when someone's in your bubble, you will probably feel unsafe, right? Because people will come into your bubble. But it's not that they have intents to harm you. It's a different worldview, it's a different way of engaging, it's a different social cultural norm. And so that's one of those updating the biases and understanding when a bias is appropriate in a particular time and space. If someone was in my bubble the way they were in Marrakesh, but in the United States, absolutely. that's not safe because it's a different cultural norm there. So I think that's one of those things of just sometimes worldviews are incompatible. Um, I see this with couples all the time. They always want to label each other right or wrong. No, you just have different ways of viewing this. Um, Dolphins, they're my inspiration. Really, I love dolphins. And everyone's like, but dolphins like like each other. And I'm like, but rape is based off of consent. And consent is kind of a human construct, and we can't really tell if like dolphins really engage with consent in the same way that we do. So that's kind of like a very human way to look at dolphins. And I feel like when I struggle with incompatible worldviews, I think about dolphins. That's really my reflection point. And how are they really bad? Are they wrong? What is their societal cultural norms? I don't know, right? I don't know. From the human perspective, bad. From the dolphin perspective, who knows? Um, Anyways, yes, I can talk about that for a long period of time. I will not. Value and goal orientations. So this is before I start doing trauma processing work, how I describe it to clients is that I focus on the present and then the future, and then we can go back into the past, right? I want to help them build a safe environment to be able to process trauma, right? Because if you're not safe, then you can't stay in thriving mode, and it's really not that effective and it gets interrupted a lot. So, what are your values and what are your goals? Who do you want to be? A lot of people think they have to process the traumatic energy out of their body before they can be who they want to be, right? And that's just not true, right? That's actually very perfectionistic, right? You're waiting to be at a perfect level of healed to be able to have the things that you want. I do it the other way around. Who are you? Who do you want to be? And how do we get you there? And in that, we often can develop a lot of cognitive skills, distress tolerance skills, emotional regulation skills, right? Because the anger is still there. So you have to learn how to deal with the anger or the sadness or anxiety or whatever. And then once they feel confident in themselves, then again, that's a stronger anchor to go back into the um, trauma work and doing that somatic past orientation work. But really, like, who are you? What are your values? It's amazing the amount of people who, when asked, like, what are your values around this, they just don't have an answer, right? They have not given that intentional thought. So how can we possibly work towards anything if you don't actually know what you want to work towards? Because if you're just doing what other people have told you to do, is it actually your value? Have you like looked at that? So um, concretely, what this can look like in um, sessions is what type of friend do you want to be? Right? Before we talk about how you want to bring this subject up with your friend, or if you're going to go to this party or whatnot, what are your values around friendship? Before we talk about grieving your, like the death of a loved one, what are your values around death, right? And beliefs around the afterlife. Um, what do you believe, like what type of employee do you want to be? What type of parent do you want to be? And breaking those down. First, getting them to intentionally and logically think about things with their frontal lobes, and then we can get the body to match. Um, I can I'm pretty blunt as a person. Uh, and so a lot of times I would just ask my question, so what? Right? And it's honestly really effective. It just kind of stops them in their track because they're not expecting it, at least the first few times. But oh my gosh, if I do this thing, this person's gonna be mad at me. So what? Oh, that's gonna be so embarrassing. So what? Is that actually the worst case scenario? That you're gonna be embarrassed? That someone's gonna be mad at you? Because what I'm hearing is not that you're gonna die. Yeah, cool. So we're safe. Check mark. Great. Love that. Now, can you handle embarrassment? Right? Maybe their window of tolerance is not like large enough to handle that. If not, then we can work on that. Um, can you handle people being angry at you? Probably depends on the person and the intensity. There's probably a fear associated with that. If this person's angry at me, they might kick me out the house. I might lose my job. I might lose my relationship. Then we can work through those fears, right? But what is the worst case scenario? And can you handle that? Really asking, so what? Why does this matter? Why are you bringing this up to me? Not in a condescending way, but please explain it. Um, And then that brings me to the three-step rule. So we already talked about discomfort versus unsafety. The three-step rule is something I made up, but it has been helpful. Uh, so if we are more than three what ifs in the future, we are in anxiety land and it's not helpful, right? And we need to use those skills to let that go. But if it's in the first three, then that is soon enough to try and plan for, right? Let's make a plan. Let's figure out how you want to engage with this. What are your values? What are your hopes, etc.? What barriers do we need to address? But once it's more than three what ifs, there's too many variables. You can't account for it. It's in what if, it's in anxiety land. So I came up with this one after a client, and a client was pregnant, and she was like, I need to lose weight because I don't want to have gestational diabetes. Because if I have gestational diabetes, then some other condition for the baby is more likely to happen. I forget what it's called. And then if the baby experiences that condition while it's in utero, then it's more likely to develop asthma. And then it'll be in gym class and have like in fourth grade specifically and have an asthma attack and die. And I was like, okay, so if you don't lose weight right now while you're pregnant, your child will die in fourth grade gym class from an asthma attack. And then they're like, well, I guess when you say it like that, but I love when clients like when I just like repeat back what they said, and they're like, "You say it like that, like oh, the way you just said it, right?" Because that's because it was emotion brain talking, not logic brain. They probably didn't even hear what they said. So that's when I actually developed the three-step rule. I'm like, okay, you're concerned about your health right now. Let's address that. Are you actually at risk of gestational diabetes? Let's start there, you know? So I can find this to be super helpful. And again, just some tools to help build up that cognitive base and that anchor for doing this trauma work. Any questions so far?
No, I just put in the comments, Jade, and I love that. I love that three-step rule and have already gone into future thinking of how to implement that with both personal and professional groups, and just how helpful that can be. And I think having that concrete kind of 1, 2, 3, okay, let's pull back is great.
Yay, I love this. Yes, my partner has now started saying this to me, which is annoying when you like, you have your own skills used against you.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I hear that. Mm-hmm.
So y'all remember when I like randomly brought up like BPD earlier? I was like, what was I talking about? I remember now. It's because there was a lot of uh there's a lot of helpful versus harmful with that population because that population is just an intense complex trauma presentation, right? And so instead of doing what people like what you think your friends want, what you feel like you should be doing for your friends, I started saying, is it helpful versus harmful? But because they were often in an emotional brain activated state that they could really only handle those two options. The other nuance wasn't like available to them. So I was like, okay, let's start with the helpful versus harmful. And I think it was like 2 years into me saying that to client. I remember where I was. I was in my bedroom at a particular house in South Seattle outside of my bathroom. And I was just thinking in my head, I should do this, whatever. And then I was like, not should. Is it helpful versus harmful? And I was like, how dare my own ingenious seep into my subconscious. What? I am not working right now. Let me be unhinged, brain. But I think this is actually super relevant here too, where when we start thinking of these things in our everyday life, they transfer into our professional life. And when we start thinking about these things in our professional life, it transfers into our personal life because it's a cognitive anchor. We say it enough times, we really start to believe that. It's like, this is kind of what it is. And yeah, there's probably some moral of the story there, but we're gonna move on. All right. Now I want to talk a bit about clinician burnout because doing this work is exhausting. Yeah. I used to see like 8 clients a day. Oh my gosh. Now I see 2 to 3 clients. All my sessions are 75 minutes, so I have more time. And even then I'm just like, no, this is too much. I now see clients 3 days a week because I was just like, can't do it. I'm exhausted. Um, because um vicarious trauma exists. When you talk about big feelings all day, guess what? Your mirror neurons make you feel the big feelings. So even if your frontal lobes are able to check and say, like, that's my client's feelings and not mine, that doesn't mean that you're not still going through the emotional intensity of the mirror neurons. Now, I don't know about y'all, but when I was taught to be a clinician, sorry, I'm older than I look because, melanin. And so I always think like back in my day, I don't know what these new young schools are teaching clinicians nowadays, but back in my day, they taught me to compartmentalize, right? They specifically were like, you cannot be feeling your feels and bringing like your, personal like feeling state into session. You gotta shut it down, shut it down. Um, and when you leave the office, you gotta shut down your feels about your client. It cannot go into your personal life or else you will absolutely burn out, right? But here's the thing. I realize in all this work of trauma processing that trauma is like all these little stored pockets of traumatic energy in the body, right? And what I was doing with clients was opening up these little boxes of stored energy and integrating them into the whole and or releasing them. So what do I look like boxing myself away? That don't make any sense. I'm just traumatizing myself. I'm dissociating from myself. I'm dissociating from my clients. I'm not connecting empathetically, right? Um, I'm boxes. I'm not allowing myself to feel. And that's everything that I work against. So start thinking more about this of like, okay, as a clinician, what does it take for me to actually show up and be present in sessions? Because again, empathy is the opposite of trauma. Community and social healing is the opposite of trauma. So if I want to help people heal trauma, I have to show up and connect and be social and be in community with boundaries, asterisk here, professional boundaries, of course, right? But empathize, connect, allow myself to feel what they're feeling, and maybe even allow them to feel a little bit of what I'm feeling, again, with boundaries. Um, but I realized that so much of vicarious trauma was us doing what we were taught by compartmentalizing, not noticing when our bodies, our mirror neurons are activated, our body is creating energy, and then we're just sitting still. Just doing this. The only movement we're getting is a little bit of a nod, right? We're even controlling our facials. We are not allowing that energy to escape us. And then when we're done with work, we don't think about this enough. We're told not to think about this enough to release it. So it stores, right? And this is really what leads to burnout. And so it's a little out of the scope of this particular training to talk more about how do you show up fully as a therapist or like as a human with like therapeutic boundaries and all of that. But I do think it's important and something I really recommend that you give thought to, um, because we as a profession have just said, like feeling your feels in session is bad, right? That showing up, disclosing, it's bad. Don't do that. But again, I really don't believe that there's anything that's just good or bad. I think it's helpful versus harmful. So then the question becomes, how do I show up for my clients in a helpful way? And that depends on the goal and the client and a lot of different things. But I think this is a huge part of preventing clinician burnout and really showing up and helping people heal, right? The amount of times where just my clients love my facials. I'm like, right? Or sometimes they just say something that's really heavy, right? And I'm just like, right? And reflecting back their experience, right? To say, I feel what you're feeling. And maybe no one has ever shown you, not only with their words and actions, but their body and their facial, like how messed up it is that you went through that. But like, I'm feeling what you're saying right now. And this is how my body is reacting. So I can only imagine what you're going through. That is like peak validation, right? Because if you can do that and stay grounded yourself, their mirror neurons will respond to that as well. They learn that they can think about this, they can feel this thing, this emotion, and not get swept up in the emotion river. They regulate with you, even if it's virtually, right? Because all of this still happens through screens. So showing up and being like, this is what it feels like and looks like to be in the emotion river with you and not get swept away. Peak trauma healing. Also, I know like I'm like, well, I see 2 to 3 clients a day, and I that's how I can have capacity for that. And y'all are an organization where I'm going to imagine that that's not necessarily like the most financially beneficial structure for y'all. But just think about how you can take this and get creative with your own implementation, and what that looks like for you. Um, I also want to talk about how, as clinicians, we have our own biases and internalized oppression, right? We've all been poked. We've all been exposed to everything our clients have been exposed to. Maybe less so with the algorithm, being picky, but like generally speaking, right? As a Black, queer, trans person, I've been exposed to the same racism as y'all, right? I saw the same shows and commercials, the like symbols and all that kind of stuff, been exposed to saying queer phobia and transphobia. And yo, I've internalized all of that stuff too, right? So it'd be insane to think that I'm not bringing any of that with me, or because I have those identities that I'm just healed from all of that. Like no one is just like gets a pass from doing that healing work. And don't even get me started on the generational piece. Cause whew, man, like I could for some reason, like my dad was straight up like, don't trust Asian people, which was like wild. There's like just beef between like Black and East Asian communities. Just like, okay. And so then sometimes, and I've talked about this with some of my Asian friends, they're like, yeah, they chose to not trust Black people. And we're like, God, now we here having to undo all of our parents' stuff, but it's not just our parents, it's our grandparents and our great grandparents. Got generational trauma all up in here. So, okay, we got a lot of internalized oppression within us. We don't need to be ashamed of that, right? I understand if you are, but you don't need to be, right? you can learn to have a healthier relationship with those feelings and do something with that shame that's a bit more productive. But for the purposes of this training, I think it's important to just realize that you have internalized biases and oppressions, as we all do. Doesn't make you a good or bad person, but it does mean that there's going to be certain things that come in sessions that are triggering, right? And it doesn't make you a failure of a therapist. Like there's no, no one gets a gold sticker for, like never having something that like upsets them in a session. Like we don't get accolades for that. It's okay. It's going to happen. And when it happens, what are your values? What type of relationship do you want to have with it? Do you have the skills to handle these things, right? Sometimes when I get activated in a session, I'm like, oh, I can't touch this. Note it. I'm gonna process this after session because, like, if I open my mouth about this, I'm gonna go off, right? Like, and that's just kind of is what it is. There are other times where, where I'm able to use that really productively, right? Where I'm like, hey, I'm kind of like really upset about what you're saying. Um, and here's why. I had a client the other day, it's a couple, and the wife couldn't show up. They're like out of town or something. So I just had a session with the husband, and the wife wants a mommy makeover. And the husband is like, we're trying to teach body inclusivity values to our children. So how dare like the mom want to change her body, right? And I'm like, okay, yes. But your wife is always like, you don't seem to care about my happiness, and you only do things for me when I am in utter distress. And here's the thing I want to do to make myself feel better. I don't need it, but it's something I want. And you're attempting to withhold the money to be able to do that. She's like more stay at home and he makes most of the money. And I tried all of the therapeutic, like nice ways of wording it, but he was being, he was really digging down. And at some point, I was just like, you did not grow up in a female body. And I was like, I understand why your wife shut down during this conversation and felt like she couldn't have it with you and got really upset because I will say I'm also getting pretty upset, right? And I feel my body getting like pretty activated because you have no idea what it's like to be in a female body and have people constantly tell you what your body needs to look like. And it feels like there is never a right answer. And she is trying to do something for her. And she's asked you so many times in so many ways to not wait until it's severe, to just listen to her and support her. And there's no harm that comes. You have the money to do this. Like, if you want to talk about the messaging to the kids, we can talk about that. We can figure out what you want to say to your kids. We're like 2. So it's like, it's not going to go in that in depth, right? But, that was a time where, like, he was able to hear me because he was like, you were able to, I could see your, like, the frustration, and I didn't mean to upset you. Like, I didn't mean to upset my wife, but we were also able to talk through that, right? And um, I think it was eye-opening for him of like, oh, this is what it's like. And I was able to stay grounded enough to be able to explain thoroughly, right? So that's just a way that my internalized like trauma and oppression came up in that moment, and I was able to use it therapeutically. Again, make sure you have the skills and capacity to do that before you try doing that. So as you go through all your sessions and your mirror neurons are activated, your nervous system is creating energy throughout the day, in between sessions, during sessions, after your workday. I wanted to just give a few more skills that can be helpful to help process this energy. So I really like somatic touch. because the science behind it is really cool. So let's say you feel your chest tightening. Touch your chest, right? Actually touch it. This is the equivalent of kissing the boo-boo, right? Because pain is biopsychosocial. So pain is our body's way, like any other feeling or sensation. Pain is our body's way of communicating with us. And so when we kind of signal that we've heard it, it doesn't need to communicate as loudly. Now, like if you've broken your bone and then you're like, it's okay. And then like that's all you do, the pain might subside a little bit for a time being. And then when nothing like changes, it's like, oh wait, nothing's changed. I'm still hurting, please help, right? And the pain's gonna come back, right? But for, the more emotional things, right? Like if you can kind of acknowledge a lot of times that pain will go away, that distress will go away, unless the core thing that is spurring it is still there, right? And then it'll come back, right? If like someone pisses you off, you can regulate, but then they do the same thing again, you'll probably just get pissed off again, right? So somatic touch, touching whatever part you like feel the emotions in the body. And this is something again you can do in the session to help regulate you. Just like, hey body, I hear you. I can't maybe fully process this with you right now, but I hear that you're talking to me. I'm not ignoring you. I'm not compartmentalizing you away. You can also add a mantra with this if you want. It's like, I'm safe. I'm in control, whatever. Scheduling. I used to work with a lot of psychosis, and this was a really helpful tool with people experiencing psychosis that I found was also super helpful for anxiety and intrusive thoughts. No, not as much intrusive thoughts, but definitely anxiety. But schedule your feelings or your thoughts. If you're in the middle of a session, um, and you are thinking about something that's stressing or even just like home stuff, just be like, I'm going to deal with this at 8 p.m. Or if you're trying to go to sleep and you're running through the day, I'm gonna spend some time with these thoughts at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, but I do need to sleep first. Um, if you're gonna do this technique, though, you have to honor the commitment you made to your body. Because when I will be working with people who experience voices, they'd be like, okay, I need to, maybe they're like doing a job interview or something. And so they're like, okay, voices, I need to get through this job interview. And then we can like chat, tell me what you need to tell me at 6 o'clock. 5:55. They're like, hello, I'm here for my appointment, right? So you don't want to build mistrust with your body, so do honor those commitments. But this is the skill that we all have like some basis in, right? You're on vacation, a work thought pops up. I'm not dealing with that right now. I'm on vacation, right? So just being more intentional with that. Breathing techniques, there's a million, right? So finding one that works for you. And then a forward flow with visualization is something I find super helpful in transitions. So after sessions or especially at the end of your day before you're transitioning into the rest of your day, is having this forward flow. So I'm going to raise this back up. And with this, I want you to imagine that like your brain, like top of head, it can just open up, right? Little line, you hinge it open, and your brain's it's in there, and it's little gooey goo. And there's a little mesh covering over your brain, so it's not gonna fall out. But you got some open air access, right? And so what I want you to do is inhale and then forward fold over. And when you forward fold, you can do this seated as well if you want. When you forward fold, I want you to imagine, to visualize gunk coming out of your brain. Anything you don't want, anything you want to release, have it come out. And you can do that as many times as you want. So you inhale, and then four-fold exhale, and then shake the head, and then stand back up. Inhale, and four-fold exhale, and then shaking out any gunk. And really visualizing what your gunk look like. If it looks like dust bunnies or dirt chips, whatever that is for you. Do that for as long as you like. And then when you're done, you can either move to a different area away from the gunk, or you can just kind of kick it aside. So with my foot, I'm just kind of like doing this, kicking it over to a different area of the room. And now you have all this empty space in your head. And I want you to just imagine filling it with whatever you want. You released what you didn't need. What do you feel like you need now? Do you need security? Do you need love? Do you need energy? Do you need happiness? Do you just want to feel connectedness with something greater than you, right? Just imagine that as like a light seeping in to your brain and filling all the empty holes that you just created. And then when you're done, close your cap and go on about your day. Um, But yeah, I think these are visualizations. The science behind them, super cool. I actually have a podcast. It's called Chaotic Healing, which with an H, not a K. That does not, I don't pronounce that clearly often apparently, but Chaotic Healing with Jagan Auburn. And I have a whole episode on visualizations and using them to help with like transitions and meeting various goals. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Um, and then, okay. So, so that was skills for the clinicians. And then the last little bit is I want to talk a tiny bit more about discerning safety. We've gone over a lot of this already, but I want to hammer it home. I'm bringing it up again because it's that important, because we cannot thrive if we are not surviving. We have to have Maslow's like first like safety layer down before we can start doing all this empathy healing work. We cannot empathetically heal if we are not safe. So remember that as you do this, you're dealing with the emotion river. Notice how your client is doing, how you are doing, how deep you are in the emotion at any given point in time. I do have a list of common symptoms that come up either during session or after sessions and with clients whenever we start doing trauma work. Whatever like first true like trauma processing session I do with clients, I like don't go like super deep. I'm like, let's just dip our toes into the trauma processing piece so you can start to see what that feels like. And then I only stay there max 20 minutes. And that's honestly really pushing it. I prefer like 10 to 15. And then I give them a whole spiel of like, this is like, watch out for these things. And they're always like, it'll be fine. And then they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, that was a lot. Like I was fine, but like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yeah. Um, so that is a good indicator to just see how much their body can handle. You just don't want to move too quick, too soon, right? Rushing, that's very fight or flight energy, right? When we are patient and take our times, it reinforces to the body that we are safe, and we're not gonna die. And then I think the last thing that this is mostly recap, but the last thing that I want to emphasize is that the goal here is not to feel safe. Okay. The goal here is not necessarily to feel safe and regulated all the time. The goal is to have appropriate reactions and responses to situations. And so if you are unsafe, the appropriate reaction is to feel unsafe. our bodies are very biologically attuned to do that. We don't need to just like get rid of that response and that wisdom. Again, unsafety, that feeling of unsafety is not inherently bad. It is just not helpful when you are safe and when we're trying to do like therapeutic goals most of the time. Um, but again, we can just think back to my analogy of being in a rural town with a lot of unfriendly flags. Um, I don't think it's super helpful to teach the body to relax in that situation. It is appropriate to be vigilant sometimes. And I see this a lot with people with attachment wounds who are just like, I should just trust people, right? That's what you're supposed to do. But then they end up getting taken advantage of because they're not actually learning and developing trust and safety with people, is why I don't do trauma work right out the bat, because I want their body to learn to be safe with me, not to feel like they should be safe with me, right? So I just want to really, I know we talked about it, but I want to super emphasize it because whenever we're engaging with something that has the potential to heal trauma, it also has the potential to reinforce trauma, right? When we're dealing with traumatic energy, it's usually one of those two things. Either we're going to heal it a little bit, or we're going to reinforce that it was scary and we don't like that. Okay, last little bit of skills, because I know people love their little checklist of actionable things that they can do. So we already talked a bit about progressive muscle relaxation as a body scan variation. If you're not familiar with that, essentially you tense a muscle and then you relax it. I find this can be a really great way to engage with body scans or mind-body connection for people who are new, because if you're just like, oh man, I feel terrible in all of my body, there's not a lot of incentive to um, do it. Uh, but if you are feeling better as you do it, more incentive to actually practice the skill. Neck, shoulder, and hip stretches, because um, again, neck, shoulders, and hips are emotional storage points in the body. Primarily, they can store anywhere, but they do tend to congregate in the neck, shoulders, and hips. So if you need to be really focused and specific about your stretches and finding movement, I would highly recommend focusing on those areas of the body. Deep cleaning is very grounding and it's moving your body. A lot of times we maybe are not going to be able to go like for a jog to, you know, um, make our body feel like we're running from a tiger. But if you're like walking around the house with a broom or a vacuum cleaner or scrubbing, which can really like help the anger response or something like that, can be really helpful, move that energy through the body. And also, then you have a clean home, which is great. I am not a deep cleaning person when I'm upset. I really wish I was, though. Um, walks, definitely, because again, that mimics the running motion of the flight, right? So going on a walk, also bilateral stimulation. If you're walking, you're probably outdoors. A lot of benefits there. Dance or yoga, because it's really mindful with your body. It's mindful movement, especially yoga. Dance, great expression, right? And expressing yourself is a thriving thing, not a surviving thing. So being able to express yourself is a great way to move out of the uh, fight or flight state, that trauma state, and also to just release stored energy. I have a retreat coming up in February that is like healing, using movement to heal. And so it's a lot of like learning how to use dance and yoga to like express our emotions and build confidence in our bodies and release stress and all of that. Intense physical exercise is really great. It kind of tricks your body into like, there's a reason why I'm feeling heightened, right? So when we're anxious, when we're upset, hyperarousal, we're breathing more shallowly, our heart is pounding, all this types of stuff, and our body's looking for danger. It's like, oh, this is a danger response. Where's the danger? And that can create like an anxiety spiral of like, you're just casually anxious and I was looking for danger, but now I can't find the danger. It's like, oh crap, but where's the danger? And I gotta look harder, right? So if you want to interrupt that, doing some intense exercise, we'll tell your body, oh, we're having this hyper-aroused response because we're exercising, not because there's danger. And so really like 60 seconds, jumping jacks, burpees, walk up a hill quickly, whatever is appropriate for your physical level, 60 seconds of spiking that heart rate, and then, ideally doing some breath, something like calming afterwards. Um, I, I mean, grounding meditative exercises, if that is your jam, gosh, yes, do them, right? Being able to settle your mind and your body, beautiful. I don't talk about talk about this one that much because so many clients with high trauma struggle with that. But if this is already in their practice or your practice as a clinician, then utilize the mess out of it. And then always have a restoration plan, right? So what happens when things go real wrong, right? When you're doing work with clients and you do some deep trauma work, what does it look like for them to have support in the next week or so as their nervous system kind of deals with all of this intense energy it just brought up? And what does it look like for you in between sessions and in between days to restore yourself, right? So that you are not feeling just like you just got dragged through the week, right? So finding your own restoration plan that is reasonable for you. So that is the last little bit that I had. Are there any questions?
I feel like there's a million and none all at the same time. Jaden, like it was such great information. I've already been texting like some of our providers at the practice of like, yep, gotta implement this and do this, and just so much wonderful information to digest. Things that I love when I can take something, like you said, kind of tangible away. And so all of those kind of last step interventions, but also things like the 3 steps and understanding that side dominance. In all of my years, I've never heard that, and I absolutely love it. And just going back to that elephant example, and I loved hearing you say that you use kind of compassionate accountability. For years, I've been telling people I'll empathetically challenge them, but I like the compassionate accountability phrase even better. So just thank you for this wealth of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Super happy to share it. It's really me just like nerding out about something like a special interest. So it's super great. And I think like you're right that this is so much, and this is just the conceptual framework, right? And then there's so much to learn about how to engage with this and tools to use that, feel exciting for you. I specialize in like movement, music, food, and art because, I come from communities that don't have access to a lot of different care. And so I want to think about how can you do what you are already doing, like take what you're already doing and with a little bit more intention, make it healing. And so, yeah, like now I've mentioned my retreats a little bit. I have a therapist retreat and there's the 25 CEs, and that's exactly what it is. It's like, how can you make brushing your hair therapeutic? And what goals does that, can that like benefit? Sitting down on a toilet, what clinical goals can we work on by doing that? And there's different ways to sit down that will improve different clinical goals. And I think there's so much here, but the foundation of it all is understanding that your body thinks it's going to die, and that to heal from that, we have to be empathetic, not poor boundaried, but empathetic. And that's really brave and it's really difficult. Um, so yeah, thanks for having me. The last thing I want to do really quick is I just want to show a few examples of what this looks like in session. So I have a couple of case scenarios. So I will read these. A client downplays their sensory overload despite it interfering with goals because they're not autistic and don't want to be autistic because that would mean they're dysfunctional. Um, these are all client examples, like things that have come up. As an autistic person, this was very hard for me in session to hear. And it took like 2 full sessions to deal with this, but this is shoulds, perfectionism. Um, there was a lot of value judgments around like what a good parent was, right? A lot of bias around autism and actually ended up dating back to like some childhood stuff, which we were able to process. Um, but as this is a really good just like example of you think you're going to die if you have autism. And we need to talk about why that is. An ethically non-monogamous client gets upset because their partner starts dating someone with borderline personality disorder. This client has had a previously bad experience dating someone with BPD and feels their partner is betraying them by dating someone with that same diagnoses. Um, in group out group here, right? Um, this one was lovely. I was like, it wasn't actually BPD, I changed the diagnoses, but I was like, so I want you to take BPD and replace it with Black people, and then tell me how what you're saying is okay. Honestly, as a Black therapist, I love being able to do that because you just like mic drop, right? Like those, it really just like cuts to the chase. But yeah, so kind of noticing that in group, out group, they were unable to empathize because of a label of a diagnosis, an out group thing. And so we were able to bring that in as a trauma perspective of like, oh yes, you were traumatized in the past, and it's impairing your ability to empathize in a way that's not value aligned. So you can either choose to keep doing that, or we can talk about what it looks like to move towards a more empathetic response and also make sure you're safe as you do it. A couple is getting into frequent arguments around cleaning versus tidying. They're now worrying if they're compatible because they both feel the other is bad for not adhering to their standards. If you work with couples, man, like, I don't think I've ever had a couple that has not had this argument, but again, there's a way you should be perfectionism, um, just the intent versus impact, the goal orientation. Like there's so many things here, but this idea that essentially it's an incompatible worldview, right? And instead of viewing it as an incompatible worldview, or not saying incompatible, but it's just a different worldview. Instead of viewing it that way, they view it as in group, out group, and danger, and bad, and unsafe. And then the last one here, a mom feeling distressed because she's unable to fix her child's mental health problems, and she asks for help in how to control her child's behavior. And so there's that saviorism, that paternalism, which makes sense coming from parents, right? But we also need to look out when they are parenting versus like having a nervous system reaction that is making things black or white, and making it hard to empathize and actually respond in a goal and value oriented way. So these are just some examples of what this looks like in session sometimes, again, to really ground this theoretically into like our clinical work. And if you want, I just have my information here. So this is my Tice Consulting and Therapy website and Chaotic Healing website. I have a Patreon. It's like $5 a month, and it has a coping skills library and a lot of like music for healing, movement for healing, BDSM for healing, like whatever. And then like a lot of science behind it. You can follow me on my Instagrams. And then Chaotic Healing with Jaden Auburn is my podcast. I do offer like consulting and coaching packages. If anyone wants help implementing these things, and obviously I do retreats. I do my big ones. I also do individualized ones. So if you want to come hang out in Spain, let me know. But yeah, that's it for me officially.
Well, thank you so much, Jaden. I have so much notes that I had written down. Like, I'm a big analogy person too. And so all of your analogies, I'm writing them down because I'm ready to just like put it into practice with my clients. And a lot of the somatic movement too. I was really interested in all of that.
Yay. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yes. So once again, thank you so much for today's training and all of just the vast various knowledge that you provided for us today. For everyone else, just as Jaden mentioned, we'll have a lot of the info, like their website and Patreon and all of that included as in the show notes. Um, we also have, other trainings for our You Need a Training, and we also will have Jaden back here at the end of October, I believe, for the ethics of a kinky therapist. I'll be joining that one too, and I'm really excited to get more knowledge and just kind of like grow in the profession. Other than that, thank you again, Jaden, and thank you for all of the information that you provided for us. And
Thanks a lot.
thanks for listening. And don't forget that you need a training.
Thank you for joining in on today's training. We look forward to having you join us again. Heart & Solutions is proud to provide CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below.